Hi, this is John Linneball from John Linneball Tutoring, and this is Elements to Know for the SAT Essay Part 1 Ethos. So here's a generalized SAT essay prompt, and I say generalized because they took out the author's name and don't determine whether the author is male or female or what the author's claim is, the thesis of the passage that you're going to have to read for the essay. So as you read the passage below, consider how the author uses evidence such as facts or examples to support claims, reasoning to develop ideas and to connect claims and evidence, and stylistic or persuasive elements such as word choice or appeals to emotion to add power to the ideas expressed. So you want to write an essay in which you explain how the author builds an argument to persuade his or her argument that, and then whatever the author's claim is. McDonald's hamburgers are the best food you can eat, something like that. In your essay, analyze how the author uses one or more of the features listed in the box above or features of your own choice to strengthen the logic and persuasiveness of his or her argument. Be sure that your analysis focuses on the most relevant features of the passage. Your essay should not explain whether you agree with the author's claims, but rather explain how the author builds an argument to persuade his or her argument. So let's move on. 3 elements the SAT, wants you to describe. So we have a repeat of the same generalized essay prompt. So, we have evidence such as facts or examples to support claims. Well, we have 3 elements here that are ethos, pathos, and logos. So ethos is evidence. And we can see evidence such as facts or examples to support claims. That's going to be ethos or ethos. I pronounce it ethos. If that's wrong, oh well, sue me if you don't like it. And then reasoning to develop ideas and to connect claims and evidence. Reasoning is logos. You can remember logos looks like logic, which is reasoning. So reasoning to develop ideas is logos, logic. And stylistic or persuasive elements, such as word choice or appeals to emotion to add power to the ideas expressed. So that's going to be pathos or pathos. I think pathos sounds better to me. Appeals to emotion, rhetoric, style. Normally you hear them listed in this order, which is ethos, pathos, logos. Here it looks like they listed it as ethos, logos, pathos. Perhaps that's intentionally, so it'll trip you up. Or, you might say, oh, okay, well, pathos must mean reasoning because it's ethos, pathos, logos, and they went ethos. Oh, okay, that's pathos, that's logos. Don't get tripped up by that. Just remember logos is logic, so that's reasoning. Ethos is evidence. If you're ethical, maybe you always make sure you have evidence. And then pathos, think pathetic. Oh, it's so sad and pathetic. Well, that's an emotion, so it's not the only emotion, but that's all you need to know. Pathos is an appeal to emotion or rhetoric or style. So we have to write an essay in which we explain how the author built an argument to persuade his or her audience of the author's claim. You want to analyze the features, and it says, do not explain whether you agree with the author's claims, but rather explain how the author builds an argument to persuade his or her audience. So that's important. I have had a student basically just write about how much she agreed with how the ACLU, with the ACLU's position that school uniforms were a bad idea. And that was great, but it's not to say whether or not you agree with whoever wrote the passage. It's to explain how the author of the passage made his, her, their argument. All right, so the first element, which is what we're discussing in this video, is ethos. Ethos is defined as information from authoritative sources, or at least some kind of evidence. So we have one type of ethos here, statistics. Statistics are quantitative data, numbers, used to support a position. So they're the results of scientific and popular polls, and they're reported using numbers. So here's an example. According to the Journal of Improbable Results, 63.4% of statistics cited in arguments are made up on the spot. In case you couldn't figure it out, that's a joke. So you could respond to that by saying something like, the author uses statistics to back his or her point, pretend that this is serious. Otherwise, you could say humor. If they said, okay, obviously the Journal of Improbable Results doesn't really exist, and 63.4% of statistics cited in arguments are made up on the spot by the person citing them. Obviously, that's a joke as well, so that would be humor. But assuming this were serious, you'd say, okay, the author uses statistics to back his or her point. So if you wanted to make a counter argument, you could say, Is it reliable? Are there other statistics that support that? The scientific method usually requires that you repeat the same experiment a number of times before people actually accept it as authoritative. Is it too small of a sample size? Is it just inappropriate? It's not, the experiment doesn't measure what it's supposed to measure. And you can always think correlation is not causation if you wanted to argue against this. So ice cream sales and murder rates both increase in summer. Ice cream does not make people homicidal. Correlation is not causation. So those are things you can think of. Probably not going to help you a lot on the SAT essay unless somebody just makes a really egregious error. If they say, well, ice cream causes murder because ice cream sales go up and then murder rates go up. Is it a coincidence? I think not. Well, yes, it is a coincidence. It's just, they have the same root cause. It gets hot. People have free time. They go buy ice cream. And people who are really hot and irritable sometimes get really irritable and people die. So anyway, getting back to this. Historical facts allusion. Commonly known facts about references to historical events. So the American Revolution started in 1776. Columbus crossed the Atlantic in 1492. So they might be making an argument, can you really say in the 2020s that we are unprepared to take risks for the greater good? So you could make a comment, the author makes a poignant reference to human history using a powerful rhetorical question. So, by the way, a rhetorical question, that's a question that is not supposed to be answered. Think about your mother asking you, do you expect me to walk around picking up after you for the rest of your life? You know you're not supposed to answer that question, and if you do, definitely don't answer it yes, right? So it's a question you're not normally supposed to answer, or if you do answer it, there's only one answer that doesn't make you look like a complete idiot. So you can always counter-argue with other historical facts. History is open to interpretation. You could say, well, reckless risk-taking causes unacceptable losses, and cite to many, many disastrous battle campaigns and things like that over the years where people didn't plan or just took an inappropriate risk. Okay. Anecdote. Stories used to illustrate a point. These can be parables from the Bible, they can be fables from Aesop's fables, or personal stories, usually from the author's personal life, but they can be from someone else's story or stories. So here's one. Just as the fox who couldn't reach some grapes figured they must be sour, people who won't work hard enough to reach or simply can't attain their goals figure those goals weren't important. So that's where sour grapes, the metaphor is from the Aesop's fable dealing with the fox who couldn't reach the grapes. You could comment, the author refers to Aesop's fable of the fox and the sour grapes to illustrate the principle of cognitive dissonance. People devalue former goals when they realize they can't reach them. So you could also respond to an author's personal stories if the author told a story from his or her life. The author personalizes the issue with a relevant story from her own life and give a brief summary of the story. Maybe she decided, well, her dreams of becoming a professional figure skater weren't that important when she realized that she just was really not any good at skating. Anyway, so presidents like to do that in the State of the Union address. A lot of times they'll use, little Timmy started a lemonade stand and tell the story of Timmy's lemonade stand to make a point about how small businesses are the backbone of American society and economics. So the counter argument to this is the plural of anecdote is not data. If you tell a bunch of stories, it's not as good as having solid quantitative data, controlled studies, etc. So you can think glurge. Glurge is a bunch of improbable stories with stock characters meant to teach a moral lesson. So I went and looked up the Glurge Gallery archives here. And that's on Snopes, which is really good for debunking email forwards that you get from your weird relatives or the ones who are nice but a little too gullible and forward things without thinking about them. Post them on Facebook or what have you. So, what is glurge? Think of it as chicken soup with several cups of sugar mixed in. It's supposed to be a method of delivering a remedy for what ails you by adding sweetening to the cure more appealing, but the result is often a sickly sweet concoction that induces hyperglycemic fits. So, too much sugar. So it's a sending of inspirational and supposedly true tales, and ones that conceal much darker meanings, well, sometimes, than the uplifting moral lessons they purport to offer, or undermine their messages by fabricating and distorting historical fact in the guise of offering a true story. Many of us, it seems, cannot overcome the urge to glurge. Thanks for that, Snopes. That really helps. So a lot of times you're going to see things like things about Einstein. So here we go. Einstein's a very common stock character because everybody knows, oh, he was the smartest guy to ever live. Whenever you hear about a really smart scientist, oh, it was Albert Einstein. So here's some things. Theory of relativity. Okay. Here's one. Did Albert Einstein humiliate an atheist professor? And I do have the link to this in the video, and it should also be in the description. So how evil and suffering can survive in a universe created by a loving supreme being. So evil is the absence of God, just as cold is the absence of heat, darkness is the absence of light. Albert Einstein did not say that. He was an atheist. He certainly wouldn't have made this kind of argument. And he was just being used as a stock character because that way if you have something else to say, someone say, oh, you think you're smarter than Albert Einstein? Well, excuse me, Mr. Smarty Pants. Okay, so we know that's silly, right? Right. Okay, so, oops, that's the wrong thing here. Okay, so we also have things like The Practice was a TV show, and there's an episode that was on the year 2000. A judge character would give criminal defendants lectures about famous entertainers with drug problems. So, he had a monkey on his back, but he beat his monkey. Well, one, it's patronizing, and it's also unintentionally funny to... Beating your monkey sounds an awful lot like a metaphor that I'm not going to bring up here. So, he beat his monkey, and then he'd say, and that turned out to be the great James Brown, or some other entertainer from, kind of the old days, and supposed to be inspiring to these minority defendants, and, who may or may not have drug problems, and well, it's just really, really patronizing. So basically, this is about a story about a judge who likes to give glurge stories. Anyway, also not an authority in a relevant field. Albert Einstein, even if he did give that little speech, just as cold as a lack of heat, evil is the lack of good, it doesn't prove the point because Albert Einstein's an authority on physics, not theology, and that kind of goes from science to theology, so you don't have to believe what he says about the existence of God just because he's a really good physicist. Doesn't prove the point. A student, you might have seen the one about the student who was a recently discharged U.S. Marine who'd gone back to college, and some really obnoxious atheist professor who would probably only exist in one of these stories is saying, well, if God exists, why doesn't he knock me down, knock me down, knock me down? He's jumping up and down, and the Marine charges him, knocks him on his butt, and says, God was busy, so I filled in for him, something like that. And it's just... Well, even if that were true, that doesn't prove anything other than, yeah, someone who's just gotten out of the Marines can probably really knock a professor down who's jumping up and down who doesn't expect to be knocked down by a Marine. Yeah, probably can do that. That does not prove the existence of God. I'm not saying whether you should or should not believe in God, but neither of those things prove it. Okay. Ethos, type and definition. On our next page here, scientific facts, commonly accepted ideas about the physical world. Well, water boils at 100 degrees Celsius at standard temperature and pressure. Adding salt to the water will raise that boiling point. It will also depress the freezing point. Other scientific facts could be used to argue against it, or that it's irrelevant. God exists because water boils at 100 degrees centigrade. Not really. God doesn't exist because water boils at 100 degrees centigrade. No, they don't have anything to do with each other. You could say, well, the boiling point's elevated only when the solute is non-volatile, so think salt, not alcohol. So that doesn't apply to the distillation of alcoholic beverages. Yeah, actually, you can distill alcohol in alcohol solution at less than the boiling point of pure water. So, news, current events, references to events with which most people would be familiar. The COVID crisis has shown serious vulnerabilities in our countries and the world's healthcare, political, and economic systems. You could, if you wanted to counter that, you could counter it with other news, irrelevancy, etc. But, you could say there are more important problems. We're dealing with these problems in the correct order, da-da-da-da-da. But basically, you'd probably just say the author refers to the current events such as the COVID crisis to point out the vulnerabilities in our political and economic systems, including the delivery of healthcare around the world. This other one, the scientific facts, you could say the author refers to the common fact of the observed boiling point of water at standard temperature and pressure to make the point that some rules simply exist whether or not we decide that other things should or should not exist, that the rules of nature cannot be violated by human beings. Human laws can be set and changed at any time. The laws of nature cannot. Okay, common sense, common sayings. The best tool in the world can't help you if you don't know where it is. That's why organization is important. So you could say the author cites to the common sense principle that organization is important because if things are cluttered and disorganized, it makes it very difficult to finish a job, especially if you can't find important tools or materials you need to complete the job. You can argue against it with common sense can be wrong. That is, let's say someone says, well, everybody knows that heavier objects fall faster when you drop them. That's why it hurts more when somebody drops something or throws something hard at you. It's like, not really. Everything falls at the same speed. It's just, things that weigh more hurt more because there's more kinetic energy behind it if it's dropped. You can also just argue irrelevancy if you wanted to argue against it, which you probably wouldn't do on the SAT, but you could. And if they do make a logical mistake, you do want to say, well, actually, no. A feather and a bowling ball actually would fall at the same speed if it weren't for wind resistance. And that was shown on the Apollo 11 mission where I think it was Neil Armstrong dropped a golf ball and a hammer and they fell at the same speed. Okay. So, did you find this video useful? If you did, please like it and subscribe to this channel. Neither action costs you anything. You'll be alerted about my new videos. Why do I care? It's simple. YouTube doesn't let me share any ad revenue unless I have 1,000 subscribers and 4,000 hours of view time in a year. While many people are watching these, I don't have 4,000 hours of watch time. I also don't have 1,000 subscribers yet. For the same reasons, you are not only welcome but encouraged to share links to this video, put it in playlists, etc. I'm always happy to read and respond to constructive criticism or suggestions for new videos. I reserve the right to delete comments from and block those who specialize in destructive criticism, trolls or things that are off topic, such as spammers, disturb people. So you can contact me on my cell phone at 415-623-4251. You can email me at john@johnlindeball.com, and you can mail me at 1859 Powell Street, number 109, San Francisco, California, 94133. Thanks for watching. If you have a copyright issue, please contact me. I'm pretty sure everything I have used here is fair use, but I would definitely be happy to discuss any problem you have with me. Contact me, Facebook, Instagram, email, phone. My Facebook is www.facebook.com/Lindeball Tutoring, all one word. Instagram, www.instagram.com/John.Lindeball.tutoring. Phone is 415-986-7355. That's my office phone. It's not my cell phone. Email, john@johnlindeball.com, and website, johnlindeball.com, and my locals.com site is testpreparation.locals.com. All right. Hope you enjoyed this. Have a good day.